Perron family's haunted farmhouse. Ed and Lorraine investigated the Perron family's farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island, which was allegedly haunted by evil spirits. The Perron family, including Roger and Carolyn Perron and their 5 daughters, moved into a farmhouse in Harrisville in 1971, where they claimed to experience a series of paranormal events. The family reported seeing apparitions, hearing strange noises, and experiencing poltergeist activity, including objects moving and beds levitating. On August 22, 1973, Ed and Lorraine captured footage of Carolyn Perron, the family matriarch, allegedly becoming possessed by an evil spirit. The footage shows Carolyn's eyes rolling back, her voice changing, and her body contorting in unnatural ways. Andrea Perron, the oldest of the Perron children, said, "These were spirits who had an attachment to the property. 8 generations of one extended family had lived and passed at the farm, and some of them had never left. My mother did historical research and found that virtually every entity we were able to name had, as living beings, either passed by their own hand or passed so traumatic a passing and so sudden a passing that they actually didn't seem to know that they were even gone." The Perron family's experiences, along with the Warrens' investigation, served as the basis for the 2013 film The Conjuring, which dramatized the events, of course. Now, in real life, the Warrens' investigation of the Harrisville case came to an end when Roger Perron ordered them to get the heck out of the house after a very dramatic seance in which Carolyn began speaking a strange language and levitated out of her chair. Andrea Perron said the only time she was ever truly frightened was during the seance, and went on to continue to say that there are no words to adequately express that event. In the years following their investigations in Harrisville, the Warrens would look into many more alleged hauntings, but Ed said that he never forgot the time they spent with that family. Next up, we have the elusive White Lady of Union Graveyard. The White Lady is said to be the ghost of a woman named Elizabeth, who passed under very mysterious circumstances in the late 19th century. According to legend, Elizabeth was unalived by her husband, and her spirit has been seen wandering the cemetery dressed in a very long white gown. However, some believe she is actually Harriet Seeley, whose young son passed shortly after being born, and Harriet herself passing soon after. This legend believes she may have passed in hopes of finding her son and still wanders their final resting place searching him out. Now, others believe she is actually the ghost of a woman from the 1940s who unalived her husband and later herself and is doomed to wander the graveyard. So it's possible that she's these 3 different women. However, one thing that's for sure is that her physical description is the one thing that remains consistent. She is a young woman wearing a white dress with dark hair. Many who have witnessed her believe they have almost hit her with their vehicle, only to find no trace of her once they actually pull over. Others claim they have often seen her hovering slightly above the ground around the cemetery, going back and forth amongst different gravestones. Union Cemetery is actually located in Easton, Connecticut, and the Warrens investigated the cemetery in the 1970s and captured several photographs of her. Lorraine used to often take walks through the cemetery, saying that it was one of the most haunted places around. Ed and Lorraine believed the White Lady was a residual haunting imprinted on the location by the traumatic events surrounding the passing. Now, they compiled their findings into a 1992 book called Graveyard: True Hauntings from an Old New England Cemetery. Ed Warren, who also investigated the Amityville whorehouse, reportedly caught the White Lady in photographs as well as videos. Now, Lorraine Warren told NBC Connecticut in 2008 that the video evidence is so valuable she kept it locked away at their occult museum. The Smurl haunting, the general story of the Smurls, is a familiar one about parents trying to find stability and just do what's best for their family. After they were displaced by Hurricane Agnes in 1972, Janet and Jack Smurl moved their family to the West Pittston home, and not long after, they claimed to have experienced uncanny incidents. Items would disappear, doors would open and close, toilets would flush, they'd lose sleep over growling noises and just horrific stenches. Now, over the years, the Smurls said that the paranormal attacks worsened. Jack claimed to have actually been SA'd by a spirit, and the entities attacked the children even the family dog. Eventually, after the Catholic Church kind of slow-walked an investigation, the Smurls decided to go to the press, which created a media frenzy. Now, writing about the sensation for a 2016 Halloween story in Pittston Progress, reporter Jack Smiles actually summarized the immense media attention. After the Smurls went public with their, descriptions of what was happening in their modest half-double home on Chase Street in West Pittston, their story became a media phenomenon, going viral the old-fashioned way through print and television. Now, local and out-of-town stations and papers covered it widely. Wire Service's stories ran in major dailies from New York to California, and in 1974, the Warrens investigated the Smurl family's home in West Pittston, which again was allegedly haunted by malevolent spirits. Now, the investigation was documented on audio and videotapes. On January 8th, 1975, Ed and Lorraine actually captured footage of a very mysterious, unexplained event during their investigation. The footage shows a strange glowing light moving around the Smurls' living room. The light is accompanied by unexplained noises and movements, and the footage was deemed actually too intense and too disturbing for public consumption. Ed Warren reportedly described the footage as one of the most frightening things that he's ever seen. In June 2017, Jack Smurl actually passed away. His family's history and story earned him rather lengthy bits in the local papers. Looking back, on the period of their lives that earned them international attention, Karen Smurl said of her father in the Citizen's Voice, "We had such a hard time and nobody to turn to. He was happy I was a voice out there for people who need help." Lastly, we have the Annabelle doll. Most of the movies set in the Conjuring universe, including Annabelle, are interestingly inspired by true events. The Conjuring movies are based on the case files of famed demonologist couple Ed and Lorraine Warren, who looked into numerous paranormal incidents, including the controversial true story of the Amityville haunting. One particular case, the Annabelle doll, has been the subject of 3 movies. All 3 films deal with a different event in the doll's timeline. So the Conjuring universe begins with the first movie, which focuses on Ed and Lorraine Warren investigating the paranormal case. Now, this follows the Warrens' investigation of the Annabelle doll featured in the movie. The doll actually received its own spin-off trilogy, which explored Annabelle's origin and the negative events that occurred when the Warrens took her. Since the franchise stretches the doll's story into 3 movies, the writers took creative liberties. Now, most of the films are fictionalized, however, small portions of the trilogy have come from the true story of Annabelle. The legend has it that a student nurse named Donna received the Annabelle doll as a gift from her mother in 1968. Donna and her roommate Angie began to notice strange paranormal occurrences. It would change positions unexpectedly, show up in different rooms of their apartment. The doll would also leave notes for the girls with messages like "help me" scribbled on them. They became very alarmed when they found red liquid dripping from the doll. Donna and her friend Angie had a medium take a look at it. The medium determined that the doll was possessed by the spirit of a 7-year-old girl named Annabelle Higgins. Now, the girls contacted the Warrens, who concluded that the spirit haunting the doll was not a 7-year-old child. Instead, it was actually a demon who had fooled the girls. Now, the Warrens believed that the demon's goal was to acquire Donna's soul. The Warrens solved their problem by taking the doll with them, but they encountered continuous car trouble on the way back to their home. Now, the demon within the doll rejected an exorcism, and in the end, it was actually put in a glass case in the Warrens Occult Museum in Connecticut. However, in 2014, the museum started facing legal issues because it operated as a commercial property in a residential zone. The museum officially shut down to the public in 2019 after the passing of Lorraine Warren, raising questions about the current location of Annabelle. As of 2023, the doll is still located in the Warrens' collection at the house where the museum used to operate. Personally, the Smurl haunting is the one that sends chills up my spine for me, but which one freaks you out the most? Let me know. Thanks for watching. I'm your host Ashley, and until next time, stay scared. Starting with the battered VHS tape, this story comes from a person on Reddit who claims that the story is true. It starts by them saying that one time in the mid to late 90s, they had a famous relative who would get a lot of fan mail, most of which was just photographs of their dogs, friendship pendants, etc. Not super weird stuff, but some a little creepy and almost stalkerish. Like, they said one day a padded envelope arrived and in it was a battered home movie tape with a handwritten label on it. Now, they said they never heard of the title, but considered themselves to be a movie buff, so thought that they would just give it a go. They said a few days later they were alone in the house for the night and they thought, what better time to watch this movie? So they locked the doors, got a blanket, made some popcorn, even their stuffed teddy, and pressed play. They said what followed was one of the most terrifying and traumatic experiences of their life.
In 5th place, their origins in the profession. Honestly, before today, I never really dug too much into the personal lives of Ed and Lorraine Warren, preferring to focus my interest on their professional work, and only really knowing about their daughter Judy from the rare time they mentioned her in one of their books, and her husband because of all the rare footage he's publicized since Ed and Lorraine's death. Outside of the Hollywood romanticizing, which I promise I'll touch on eventually, how did Ed and Lorraine actually fall into this line of work? So Lorraine was 9 when she first saw auras. She thought everyone saw them, but found out quickly otherwise when she brought it up at her Catholic school, when she compared the lights surrounding the Mother Superior and Sister Joseph, and was told immediately to never talk of what she saw ever again, learning to, hide her gifts or joke it off. Ed, on the other hand, grew up in a haunted house. He'd look into closets and see faces, one specifically of an old lady. The temperature in his room would drop and he would hear footsteps and heavy breathing. When he brought it up to his father, he was told that, there's a logical explanation for everything, and just leave it at that. So they both did their very best to try and ignore their gifts, wanting to live normal lives, but the universe drew them together and had different plans. Ed had a near-death experience while serving in the Navy during World War II, when the ship he was on collided with an oil tanker in the North Atlantic. A fire erupted and all of the men on the ship had to jump overboard. As Ed was in the icy water, he prayed for help and was soon rescued, believing it to be from cosmic interference. So after that experience, he returned home and asked Lorraine to marry him, and they got married almost immediately. After the war, Ed took up a profession as a fine arts painter, with the duo traveling from fair to fair to sell their wares, and eventually this became helpful during the beginnings of their work. They would research houses they believed to be haunted, and then, go to that house. After Ed would paint the domicile, he would hand the painting to Lorraine, who would knock on the door and offer the homeowners the painting as, their ticket into the house. Once she struck up a conversation with the homeowner, they would learn more about the property and hauntings, if there were hauntings, that is. At one house, which already had, some local notoriety as a supernatural hotspot, Lorraine went into spontaneous trance and claimed that this is where she learned not to fear death. I thought there was more to that. In 3rd place, we have Catholicism as an undercurrent. This is probably the only thing that has always bugged me, and while it might be less of like a secret in the gotcha sense, allow me to explain. Hauntings Ed and Lorraine spoke about were caused by people who refused to conform to traditional family values. Only people who submitted to the patriarchy and the church could be safe in their eyes. Their 1980 book, The Demonologist, kind of explains it all. That Ouija boards would get you haunted, but so would reading books about witchcraft, owning an image of a non-Christian deity, or attending conscious-raising groups. The horror in Amityville was supposedly aggravated when the unlucky homeowners engaged in the unholy pagan practice of, meditation. Addiction, depression, and disobedient children were all satanic. Hate, rage, despair, misery, drunkenness, and a sense of worthlessness will attract the demonic in a snap, according to Ed. One story in The Demonologist centers on a young woman who succumbed to evil after being fornicated with against her will. I do own this book, and I remember that not sitting super well with me. It was essential not just to stick with the status quo, but to be satisfied, with Ed going on record as saying, that a happy home is one's best defense, and even the most powerful exorcism will be effective only if you keep up an emotional atmosphere that does not attract such entities. And while I do believe this to an extent, not so far as Ed does. That atmosphere would involve going to church, by the way, saying that once a week was a good start. Yeah, I don't go to church. When you really think about it, the Warrens' entire basis of work kind of relied on victim blaming, evil that could, only happen to people who were already evil themselves. So personally, I don't agree with this whatsoever. Bad things do happen to good people, and not just because they don't follow Catholicism doesn't make someone evil. If you don't see what I'm seeing, allow another quote from Ed to help clarify things. People who do negative or patently unnatural things are essentially doing the devil's work for him, and actually attract negative spirits to their side. Ed Warren was the homophobic brand of Catholic. Yes, I'm fully aware that not all Catholics observe this, and while most do not, Ed fell under that specific strain that sadly does. As a queer gal who didn't fully learn this until today, it kind of broke my heart that people who were so open to helping others and the unknown could be so close-minded. In 2nd place, we have fraudulent items in the museum. So Ed and Lorraine were investigating numerous cases from the 1950s until they passed, right? And they founded like a whole society devoted to the research and investigation of the paranormal in 1952. Not to forget their entire museum attached to their home dedicated to objects from their cases. So, explain to me how their website only has 10 public case files, and why so much from the museum looks like leftovers from a spirit Halloween. Doesn't anyone else find it pretty suspicious that we only get details from the really big news cases, while artifacts from other, lesser cases are barely a footnote and have no story or witnesses attached? So in one corner of the Warrens Occult Museum is the skin of a tiger that is said to have killed 33 people in India while possessed by a demonic spirit. But yet, when I try to research this were-tiger, I find no account of any reportings in history about such a case, outside of, their quotes, or any offers from Ed and Lorraine to go into detail about any events leading to how it came into their possession. Seriously, take a look at some of this stuff. Given what I know about modern day Satanism, that idol looks like a papier-mâché alien mock-up. Well, most folks who practice Satanism don't actually pray to any sort of idol, or to the devil himself. But sure, for a moment I'll pretend like that's real and move on to the, black magic skull, which just looks like a cheap haunted house prop for a glow-in-the-dark room. Ditto for the, chilling masks. You know what, actually that's a lie. I've seen cosplayers make better masks. I'm not going to even try to rationalize the skull with horns or the recreation of the Witch of Monroe. Y'all don't need to see me fuming right now. In first place, their personal life. So if you watch the film franchise, you'd think Ed and Lorraine had a pretty ideal, wholesome, perfect Americana family style life. But the reality isn't so shiny or pure, despite what, they preach all the time. In the early 1960s, Ed Warren initiated a relationship with an underage woman with Lorraine's knowledge. Ed was in his mid-30s when he met Judith, who was exactly half his age. Yucky. Having not yet gained enough fame as a self-trained demonologist to pay the bills, Ed was working as a city bus driver in Monroe, Connecticut, while Judith was a student at Central High School in the nearby town of Bridgeport, who, conveniently rode his bus route. The two began an amorous relationship, according to a legal declaration from Judith in November of 2014. Heck, by 1963, she had moved into the Warrens' home, and for the next 40 years, she had a sexual relationship with Ed with Lorraine's knowledge. That same year, Judith was arrested after someone reported her relationship with Ed to local police, because, busybodies everywhere, and she spent a night in the North End prison in Bridgeport while police tried to persuade her to sign a statement admitting to the affair. After she refused to cooperate, she was ordered by the court to report to a delinquent youth office for the next month. So, Ed, being the great guy he was, picked her up from school every week and drove her to the mandated meetings. Judith claimed that Ed told her many times that she was the love of his life. The Warrens explained her presence in the home as a niece or a poor girl who they had taken in out of charity and who helped them with office tasks. And she was mentioned in a lot of their books as being, their secretary, most notably in The Demonologist, which I've already quoted a couple times today. What do you know? I own a copy. In May of 1978, while in her 30s, Judith became pregnant with Ed's child, and Lorraine persuaded her to have an abortion because the birth of a child could become public and any scandal could ruin the Warrens' business. Now, if that wasn't awful enough, Judith has also claimed that Ed was, on occasion, physically offensive to Lorraine. Judith described one night in particular where she saw Ed slap Lorraine so hard she lost consciousness. Early on, she said, she witnessed him backhand his wife. Well, it might be easy to dismiss all these claims as, hooey, or someone trying to make something out of nothing. There's an interesting element from Lorraine that kind of proves this to be true. So when Lorraine signed on to consult on the Conjuring movies, she got a contract that states that the movies will not feature negative information about the Warrens, mentioning specifically intercourse with minors, youngling bad videos, anything to do with women of the night, or sexual violence. Kind of weird to have to spell that out if you don't have anything to worry about. Now, this is where I was wondering, well, where was the daughter in all this? Judy is still very much alive. What does she have to say about it? She spent most of her years living with her grandma and not her parents, claiming that it was because her parents were always traveling, so it was the easier and safer option. Her parents told her that they took Judith Penney in so she could have a place to stay and watch their house. But their daughter could have helped watch the house if she lived with them. Just saying.
Number 5 on this list is the relationship. As we'll look at a bit later in this video, Ed and Lorraine's relationship might not have been all it was cracked up to be. The couple that inspired The Conjuring have often been talked about as being one of the greatest married couples ever. In the movie The Conjuring, the pair very clearly have each other's back, and it's clear that there's a deep foundation of love between them. Or at least that's how the movie likes to show it. Real life may have been a lot different. Judith Penney was someone who would have had access to the Warrens' relationship and would have been able to see it behind closed doors. We'll get into why that is the case later and explain who Judith Penney is, but for now, just take my word for it. Apparently, she has come out and said that the Warrens' beautifully loving relationship that we saw on screen is all a bunch of baloney. In truth, Ed was extremely violent and toxic to Lorraine. This toxicity would manifest itself in many different forms. Oftentimes, it would come out in harsh, verbal that felt as if it was coming right from thin air, totally unprovoked by Lorraine. However, occasionally this would manifest into physical abuse. Judith has come out and said that one particularly bad evening she saw Ed backhand Lorraine across the face with all his might, and apparently she lost consciousness. Now, Lorraine wouldn't just sit there and take the abuse either, she would fire her own shots as well. Judith thought that some evenings one of them wouldn't even be waking up the next morning based on how much they were fighting and how intense it would get. This has all the telltale signs of a horribly toxic relationship. The pair were just very good at hiding it. Number 4 on this list is the Amityville horror story. I feel like you've heard this story before, guys. Arguably the most famous of all the Ed and Lorraine Warren cases, this singular case launched the pair onto the main stage as being some of the biggest demonologists and paranormal investigators on the planet. Therefore, it was incredibly important to their image and their brand that this story was believed by the public. Fact of the matter is, though, they made the entire thing up. Ronald DeFeo Jr. was the spark behind this entire story. In 1974, Ronald gunned down his entire family in that home for seemingly no reason. He was later sentenced to life in prison for his crimes and died behind bars at age 69. These murders were brutal though and were heard nationwide. That's why when the next family to move in claimed the house was haunted, it actually got a ton of attention. The family said that slime would appear all over the place with no apparent origin. Things would swing open and objects would fly around the room. The house itself could simply not warm up and would stay incredibly cold for weeks on end. The media got wind of this, and so did Ed and Lorraine. They went into this place and went on to have their most successful case ever, ultimately concluding that the house is in fact haunted. However, this just simply was never true. The family's lawyer later came out and said that they collectively made up this story together and thought it would get a lot of traction over a few bottles of wine. The Warrens' initial success literally started by a few drunk people deciding they were going to pull a trick on everyone. Even though this news came out, the Warrens have always held strong onto the fact that the house was in fact haunted. Number 3 on this list is Judith Penney. Ed and Lorraine Warren were married right up until Ed died back in 2006. The couple had been together for a long time and shared quite the life together. I mean, think about all the crazy things that they did. I highly doubt that many people can say that they stopped ghosts around the world and became famous together. While they were at the height of their success, they looked like a power couple. A real duo that you wouldn't want to trifle with. Ed and Lorraine Warren together taking on the world one ghost or possession at a time. Well, during all of that, although it looked like it was just the two of them, there was actually a third. Judith Penney has come forward and said in a sworn statement that she had a relationship with Ed Warren for 4 whole decades. 4 decades where they were having an intimate relationship that the world had no idea about. Apparently, Judith moved into the Warren household when she was 15 years old back in 1963. Ed, who was in his mid-30s at the time, would sleep with her regularly, and Lorraine Warren was well aware of the entire thing. I mean, she obviously was, considering Judith literally lived with the pair in their own house. In fact, before Ed's big career of being a demonologist took off, it said that he would drive Judith's bus to school. How freaking creepy and gross is that, guys? Literally her school bus driver, but also her lover while she's 15 years old. This relationship apparently went on until 2003, 3 years before Ed finally passed away. Obviously, the Warrens didn't want any of this getting out to anyone and kept it very hush-hush. She even had to have when she became pregnant with Ed's child, and that was kept under wraps. What we thought was this power duo was actually a sick and twisted trio that we knew nothing about. The Warren family, before Lorraine died, came out and said that they had no knowledge of the alleged conduct. And finally, number 1 on this list is the smoke and the mirrors. We've already talked about the Amityville horror house and the lady in white here and about how they're all fake. Well, guess what, folks? I hate to do this to you, but they ain't the only ones. Everything the Warrens did was just a bunch of smoke and mirrors. This Smurl haunting saw other experts come in and look at the space. Nothing was wrong with it. Some of the exorcisms they performed, those people weren't really possessed by the devil. They were mentally ill people that the Warrens were preying on. The whole story about how they cured someone of being a werewolf, like, That doesn't even make any sense. Smoke and mirrors. That's what the Warrens' career was. Now, that's not to say that they didn't inadvertently stumble upon something paranormal every now and again. I mean, if you believe in that sort of stuff, then they must have, based on how active they were in the community. But basically, a lot of our favorite stories that rocketed them to the top of the demonology community are completely fraudulent. I guess it's not the worst thing in the world to know that we aren't living among as many ghosts as the pair claim that we were.